So, Myra Kalman, everybody. So these are very beautiful and slightly bizarre chairs. Thank you so much for coming. It's always a pleasure to be here and play here, and I assume sing here, and I assume talk here. So we thought that we would interrogate Myra about what's about to happen.
Oh, okay. But I thought we had to start with my mother's bra. Can we just start with my mother's bra?
Of course.
Then I'll be happy. Which was Nico's trial by fire and how we met, because my mother was frying. We were in Rome. We were in Rome, and he was 12. My mother was frying blintzes in the kitchen.
And I came, and I guess, you know, I wasn't that close with your mother, and I turned up, and I guess I had the key or something, and I came in, and no one was home, and then I heard this sort of sizzle of hot fat, and then went in, and there was Myra's mother in
her giant bra,
in her panty girdle and a giant bra, and from that point on, you know, one sort of becomes family. Yeah, exactly. Once you've seen someone's mom's panty girdle, it's kind of a wrap.
You can talk about everything after that.
So Myra and I have been friends and collaborators for a really, really long time. We met when I was 13 and lived in Rome at the same time as Myra and her family. And 12 years ago, Myra made a set of illustrations for The Elements of Style, the extraordinary grammar manual. And we made a piece together about that. And then 2 years later, we made a sequel. And do you want to talk about Principles of Uncertainty, what this book is?
Well, it started with, I just want to say that also the piece that we performed, The Elements of Style, was in the main reading room of the New York Public Library. So it was one of those extraordinary events of taking this place that had to be hushed with lots of space for, I'm just moving around here, with lots of space for not speaking. And then there was this exuberant and amazing composition and performance.
We decided that, I mean, that basically what we needed to do was make as much noise as possible in the library. So it feels sort of transgressive, and it feels slightly insane. So we had an army of amateur percussionists organized around a dinner table.
Right.
Some of whom are here tonight, so we welcome you and celebrate your journey. And people slamming books. We had your doctor on a ladder. Hi, Dr. Beautyman. And it was an extraordinary thing.
Right.
So
clattering teacups and saucers. So that led us to The Principles of Uncertainty. Was a year of my doing a monthly illustrated online essay for the New York Times, and it was about basically nothing, in the sense that it was just about, you know, at the time it was a good counterpoint to news, because don't we all have way too much news? And so the desire was to just follow a person in their life, and that became The Principles of Uncertainty. And then so Nico and I, we
chose text and figured out, and basically, so I guess what's always fabulous about Myra's writing and illustration is that there's an element that is surreal, not just in the way that it looks and not just the way that the text works, but also in the way that one object relates to the object next to it. So you have you have a story that seems fragmented, but then when you zoom out, it feels quite sort of a piece. And one thing that I wanted to ask you is, because you work so much in opera, which generally is either very plot-driven or completely abstract, what it's been like to get into these songs.
I just love the sort of quotidian nature of it, but also there are little pockets of like real meaning, for me at least, that I find in there. But I'm trying to feel, I mean, as a countertenor, you're already singing in this weird space anyway. And so it's funny to kind of narrate it in head voice and make it sound normal. And there's an interesting juxtaposition there with the kind of the pedestrian nature of some of the subject matter, and then also the highfalutin stuff which is under the surface.
One of the things that I should also say is I was Myra's archivist for a very long time, which involved going through, before the age of digital photos, going through all these photos and trying to organize them by sort of category. And what immediately became clear is that, you know, there would be sort of family snaps, and then Myra would vanish onto the street and follow some kid for 3 hours, and
it was a section of it, in and of itself.
So there'd be, or there was an entire section of beautiful buckets, and sort of these amazing collections of children in Naples. And so that spirit of finding beauty in the everyday is something that I've not just in this piece, but in most of my music, try to sort of emulate. And I guess we should talk about sort of the countertenor voice is. It's a special one, and it's something that is both very, very old and very new in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, the tradition of the castrated men in the 18th century who were these stars and who were kind of symbols of sexuality and symbols of virility, but also this sort of very deep emotional thing for a lot of people. And they're really the reason that opera became public. So they're very tied with that. And then in the modern day embodiment, starting with Alfred Deller, who I know, these songs were inspired by, and a totally different tradition, a different school of countertenoring, which is the same register, but somehow much less potent in a certain way. And then we've had this progression of countertenors through the past 50 years who have really taken it in all different directions, and now I feel we're somewhere in the middle with the kind of operatic excitement of the castrati, but still the purity and the somewhat chaste beauty of the
or not,
yeah, depending on which.
Depending on who you're asking. I think another question for you is about. So, talking about finding the beauty in every day, how does it feel, or not, how does it feel? In terms of when you write text and you set it to an image, what do you feel like the transformation is when it's set to music?
That's when it becomes unearthly. I mean, for me, it's interesting because when I'm working and I'm painting and I'm writing, I'm also, there's always music as a counterpoint. My own music, of course, and a scary voice that you're lucky that you don't have to hear, but that I'm singing a lot of what I'm writing, so I really see it. This conglomeration of the image and the word, I see it as set to music, and then when it really is, it's quite, well, that's an extraordinary thing. And also the unearthliness of the countertenor voice, sort of the angelic voice as a counterpoint to a bucket, is really something very appealing, because then you really never know what world you're in. Sometimes you're in a dream world, and then you're kind of navigating the real world, and it's all kind of madness and strange at most of the time. So here we are.
So here we are, right? Exactly. Well, so obviously the countertenors have existed for a long time, and the modern examples, it's very easy to wander around England and hear countertenor voices every day in religious contexts. But in operatic contexts, I would say that sort of Oberon from Benjamin Britten's adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream is the kind of great example. And of course, he plays Oberon, who's the ruler of the other world, right? He's the ruler of the world that occupies a dream space where logic doesn't make sense, where things are juxtaposed that don't really, which is why I thought that this was the voice for this project.
Do you write differently for a countertenor in some way? Either how is it different?
Oh yeah. Well, the range is smaller, and in a lot of cases, the acrobatics of vocal music, just that they don't make sense for a countertenor. It's more, for me, it's a more linear instrument. It's not about, the way in which showing off works is totally different. I guess it feels like existing in a very old building where you change the way that you behave slightly, right? You look at things closer, and so for me, it's like most of the music that we're doing today exists in just over an octaves range, right? Whereas if you write for a soprano, she's like higher, she's like lower, not this note, all the rest of them, which is not the case, not the case, and so there's that, and then also it's about taking advantage of the fact that it's, for me personally, it's an instrument that I hear in sacred context a lot, and then of course in operatic context as well. So there's always the sense of ritual that we'll get to in the piece with Myra as well as the third piece, which is this bizarre, ancient song, which you're already obsessed with, even though you haven't heard it.
I said we'll skip this and go right to the ancient song.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I ask Myra one question too? Because I've loved your work for a long time, I should say, and I'm interested, for me, there's always the moment of onset, the moment of phonation, when you bring your two vocal cords together, and that's like when phonation begins.
Phonation?
Yeah,
What does that mean?
So it's kind of like you have a blade of grass between your thumbs and you're blowing air and it makes a buzzing sound, but that's actually what's happening inside this little voice box. And so it's the beginning of tone. And I wondered if you ever think about, because singers, when they sing, they're thinking about how to breathe in so that they can then start the tone well. But do you ever think about the first point of contact, whether it's with a brush or with a pencil, with the paper, and what that sort of visual phonation, as it were, will be like, or does it just happen much more naturally?
I spend most of my time imagining phonation rather than actually phonating. I think that, and then it's that we were talking about why do you do a certain project to avoid another project?
Right.
I mean, basically, that's really what we're doing. So the sense of I really procrastinate a great deal because that initial touch is so intense and so overwhelming that I'm afraid of it. And then, you'd think by now I would not be, and then I get over that. But there is an absolute moment of, the paper's on the table and the brushes are there, and you look at them and you go,
I need to organize the closet.
exactly. and make a sandwich or two, but finally one gets there.
Oh, good. I feel better now.
But I mean, I have the same problem as you might imagine. I mean,
Yeah.
the blank page is the scariest. And actually, one of the scariest thing is if you tell someone that you have a new project, you say, "Oh, I got this amazing commission," their first instinct is to say congratulations. But I always think that you should say, "I'm so sorry," because essentially you've been challenged to a duel. Right.
Right.
Some orchestra has called you up and said, pistols at dawn. Like your job is to fill up. You have to create from nothing this stack of paper, and then FedEx it to these people, and then it's absolutely terrifying. So as you say, like a project, there are a lot of things that you can do. Like you can alphabetize your Sharpies.
You can imagine, you can fantasize about being a box maker in Japan and
Right.
just being told what to do, which is kind of the next step, I think.
Yeah,
So
I
in
think for all of
summary,
us.
we're all just basically terrified of doing what we're paid to do, which
Yeah.
is great.
I just remember.
Is that the prerequisite? It
I
might
think
be,
so.
Yeah.
I remember Myra, when I was really young, I can't remember, I must have been 15 or 16, I went to a talk that you did, and Myra said something that was completely life-changing, and I repurpose this all the time, which you said that the principal motivation for all art making, I'm paraphrasing, but is fear and snacks.
Right. Fear. And fear, snacks
And fear
cover
about
a lot
snacks
of
and-
things. Right, exactly. But fear covers a lot of ground. Covers boredom, fear of many different things. Fear of not being, but yeah.
So my sort of final question about this before we actually have to sing this thing, and I don't want to make you
Phonate.
altogether too much, although maybe it's good for you.
Yeah, right. Good one.
Is when you're delivering, when you're performing, when you're communicating a text, for instance, like the folk songs are pretty straightforward, right? Like you heard what he was saying, and it was pretty obvious what he was saying, and they're allegorical.
Oh, good.
But yeah, it was totally clear. But with something like Myra's text, you have to continue the idea far enough so that you experience not just the sentence but the juxtaposition. How do you do that technically?
Well, your music makes it incredibly easy, I feel like, because there are a lot of sort of planes that you can surf from one to the other. But I think, Handel, who is kind of a home base for me, will sometimes put rests in the middle of a word. And he does that, and I think it's really interesting, he does that for an expressive sense, because we don't always think in full words or full sentences, and the idea of the da capo aria in Handel, this ABA format, where you return to the A section, that's really how our mind works, I think. We sort of cycle through things. So in a way, I try and be very human about connecting things instead of, and now I make an artistic connection of this point to that point. I'm trying to be a real human being. It's not so interesting to watch, I find, opera singers sing opera. It's more interesting to watch human beings sing opera.
Agree. and I think also one of the things that I love about you as a performer is that it's not about this really obvious expression. And this is what I think with your more sort of with a lot of your paintings, the idea isn't this obvious thing. It never comes at you straightforward. It's always a little detail, a little bucket in the background. There's always a little kind of just a glimpse of.
Right. Because that in the same way as you taking a breath in between, the digression, it really is something that is to me the most interesting thing about anything. And I always say that the plot is the least important and the most boring thing to me, and everything else that happens around it is really the thing.
Exactly, and I think what's so great about a book like The Principles of Uncertainty is that it reads as compellingly as a novel, but there is no plot in the same way that fiction can be said to be gossip about non-existent people. Right? And I always think that's we're all you have TV for this.
Yeah, and also a narrative always emerges. It's kind of like someone's Instagram account. It's not necessarily that they're connected, but the
parcel
narrative
arrives.
emerges.
Right, exactly. Hi.
Hello, everyone. So in case you forgot from the introduction, my name is Nat Trotman. I'm the Curator of Performance and Media here. happy to be joining the stage with you. Thank you for that. That
Please,
was
pleasure's
beautiful.
mine.
So the third piece that will be performed tonight, as Caroline said in her introduction, is an extension of a project that we've been doing at the Guggenheim for the last 6 months called Circle Through New York. And it is based on what we have affectionately come to call the oldest song in the world. So I thought before we opened up to some dialogue that I would give all of you some background on both the project and the song, because there's a fair amount of backstory involved here. So if we could have the first slide, please. So, Circle Through New York is a project that the Guggenheim launched in March that ran through the end of August by artists Lenka Clayton and John Rubin. It's part of the Guggenheim's fledgling social practice initiative. And the chief goal of this project was to foster dialogue and collaboration between diverse communities in New York by working across apparent boundaries of geography, of identity, of economics, and of social function. And so the way that it did that, as you see illustrated in this diagram on the screen here, was to draw an imaginary circle through the city that stretched from Harlem through the Bronx, through the Queens, and back around to the Upper East Side. And after a long period of research, Lenka and John, the artists, identified 6 very different public institutions that lay upon this circle, which you see around the outer perimeter of the diagram there in blue. And through a process of discussion with each of these places, they came to select some aspect of themselves that they would send to each other month by month over the course of 6 months. So these are the things that you see on the inner circle that's spinning. And you'll see in the little window there the month that shows what was aligning with each thing, you know, over the course of the project. So it was through this process that the Guggenheim came to work with NYU's Institute for the Study of the Ancient World, and with the aspect of themselves that they chose for this project, which was the oldest song in the world. There we go. The oldest song is more commonly known as the Hurrian Hymn. It's the oldest known example of a fully notated song, dating from 1400 BCE. It was recorded on this small clay tablet that you see both sides of here on the screen, which is around the size of a smartphone, and was found at the site of ancient Ugarit in western Syria. On the obverse of the panel, which you see at the top, there's cuneiform script that indicates on the top, above the double lines, the lyrics to the song, which are written in the Hurrian language, and on the bottom, musical notation, which is written in the Akkadian language, both using the same alphabet, cuneiform alphabet. Hurrian, unfortunately, is a lost language, so we don't really know what the song means, but because they use an alphabet that other languages use, they've worked out the phonetic spelling, phonetic sound of the lyrics. It's generally considered through research to be a hymn to the goddess Nikal, who was the moon goddess and the goddess in charge of fertility, and that it refers to the making of offerings and libations to her. Amazingly, thanks to a lot of scholarly research, and because the notes themselves are marked in Akkadian, which scholars understand, we've been able to, or I haven't, scholars have been able to construct what they believe is an accurate transcription of this melody. And it was here that the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World comes into the story. In 2015, the chief curator at ISAW, Jennifer Chi, and scholar Pedro Azara chose to include an interpretation of this song in their exhibition From Ancient to Modern Archaeology and Aesthetics. They worked with an archaeological student and musician whose name is Joan Burrell, who created a new recording of this song and also performed it at the exhibition opening. And it was this version of the score and his interpretation that they chose to send around the circle through New York. So we have audio of his recording, one of his recordings of the song, which we will play for you now. So, the oldest song in the world.
The oldest notated song.
The oldest notated song in the world.
We think.
No, that we know of.
Right.
Yeah. So rather than merely circulate that recording and have it played as we just heard it at each of the places around the circle for John and Lenka's project, we actually decided to use that score as a sort of open text and to send the score around and ask each of the different sites around the circle, regardless or irrespective of their musical abilities, to interpret and perform that song in various ways. So in order to do that, Joanne Burrell, who you just heard singing, traveled to New York and trained all people at all 6 or all 5 places in the song. And over the course of the months, we had in March the Guggenheim staff sing the song daily in the rotunda upstairs to the public twice a day. We had, in April, it was performed by the choir and other musical groups at St. Philip's Church in Harlem. In May, it was remixed by the resident DJ / employee at Pet Resources in the Bronx, and also played at a frequency that was only audible to dogs. In June, it was learned and performed by students in the music department of the Frank Sinatra School of the Arts. And in July, it was integrated into the programming of Just Broadcasting in Queens, where they're actually still in the process of finalizing their production of a Bollywood music video version of the song. And in August, finally, it returned back to the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World, where it was subject of a special mini exhibition. And so it's really there that the idea for Nico to interpret it again spiraled out of. And just a little bit before we get to conversation, I have a little video clip that's only about 1.5 minutes long that shows some of these other interpretations that I'd like to show. So if you could roll the video, please.
Anutani yashasive Shinute suturi yahungara Kudurnita shakila tsidi shipri Umaru hatuari.
It's a very special song. First of all, because it's the most ancient song that we know. On top there were the lyrics of the song. On the bottom there were instructions on how to play this song on a harp. Even if it's 3,400 years old, 95% of the songs that we listen to have been written based on this same scale.
It catches you. I don't know if anybody else feels the way because I'm getting a lot of...
I can see that, if you're circulating it through the city, everybody can have an opinion about this hymn, and everybody can sing this hymn from their perspective, and there we are. Wow, we're connected.
So that just gives you a little taste. I should add my little pitch to say that the project's website, circlethroughnewyork.com, has full documentation of all of the various versions that were done, so please visit that. So now, Nico.
Hi.
Hi. Given all of this background, which you were aware of as you were thinking through this song and composing your new version, I'm curious, well, I guess on one level, just how you feel about following this thing coming out of this project and reinterpreting this song.
So this song is amazing. I mean, what's great about it is how little we know about it. And I think one of the most mysterious things about musical notation, and I think about this all the time actually, is that we in the sort of Western classical tradition are code breakers. That's all we do. Is that the French word for sight reading is déchiffrage, decoding, and essentially, composers, we encode this information, that sonic information, and we stick it on a piece of paper or on a tablet, as the case may be, or literally on a tablet now, which is how I'm reading music. And then we hand it to people and say, go. And what the amazing thing is even as recently as 250 years ago, there are things that we don't know, right? There are things in Beethoven that we don't know what he wanted, right? And there's certainly things in Bach where I will say that one of the only times I've ever seen classical musicians fight one another with their hands was about ornamentation in early Flemish polyphony. And I'm not kidding you. Like like we're talking like full weave pulling, like Eindhoven has never been the same. So when you're given an ancient text like this, there's something amazingly liberating about it, because you don't have to, the unknown bits you can sort of replace with anything. So the sense of harmony is miraculous as it is. But then I was drawing on my own background as a choral musician, and the tradition is as long as we can describe, which is composers taking old chants, old Gregorian chants, old chant forms, and reharmonizing it. One of the things that people often play before they get married is a piece by Giroflé based on the old Ubi Caritas chant, which I'm going to play because it's very similar to that. So it goes. So there's that. And then also there's this sense of a relationship with antiquity. And I think that, one of the greatest things for me is watching scholars fight. And I saw another excellent example of this. I saw an exhibition of Greek sculpture in Germany, where someone had said, well, actually, as it turns out, you think it's all about this classical purity, and you think it's about these white objects, but they would have been painted like, it's like the Versace store on, a couple blocks away. And they had done this. They'd made these replicas of what we knew to be these austere white figures, and covered it in kind of, they turned all the goddesses into these sort of sex clowns, and it was outrageous. So anyway, there are all kinds of ways of interfacing with the past, and I think with something like this, I thought, okay, let me do a little bit of both. So I don't even want to say I wrote it. It's sort of the text is presented absolutely as per the manuscript. So I don't try to find out, what would have happened, how the sentence would have been brought up. I'm decoding this thing in a really literal way. And then the ensemble is interesting. It's 2 strings, whom you've met before, and then 3 brass instruments. And one of the other amazing things, if you have a relationship with the Bible or the Hebrew Bible, instruments are everywhere. And one of the things that for me is the most touching sort of chapters in the Bible, of course, is the book of Psalms, all of which would have been sung in some way that we don't know, right? And the 150th Psalm is essentially it's a guide to orchestration, right? It's a list of instruments, and it's like, this is how we're gonna praise the Lord with this thing, with that thing. So it's literally going through the flutes, the clarinets, the oboes, the tune cymbals. So for me, I think it was important to have the sort of ritualistic nature of brass represented on the stage. So there's that. And then also, a great sort of coincidence is that Anthony has sung in a dead language before. And he has been the title role in Philip Glass's opera Akhenaten, which of course is about the pharaoh of the same name, who, in addition to being a monotheist, also inscribed these hymns to himself on these sort of steles outside of Tel Amarna. So Antony, as this pharaoh, has sung in Akkadian. He's sung in what they think ancient Egyptian may well have sounded like, or not. And so I thought this is a perfect match. And one of the other things I just want to tell you about this song that's amazing is that it does seem kind of rambly, but what it has inside it are these little 2-bar repeated phrases, and they're never the same, but you'll hear that the music is kind of going along, and then he repeats one thing. I say he, she. The text repeats one they. So you're going along saying phrases of praise. Phrases of praise. And then you're going along and saying a bunch of things about how great the goddess is, how great the goddess is. So I tried to make that really, really explicit in how the music sounds. Did anything else?
You just answered all the questions I could have
in one
thing, and I see our musicians are here. Which
I just want to say one final thing, which is that when you find yourself listening to classical music, especially, it was particularly contemporary classical music, we, in a lot of cases, if it's a new commission, let's say for 3 people, for a piano trio or something, it's the newest song in the world because one person has heard it, and then in the rehearsal 3 people have heard it, and maybe like an administrator in the back, and then all of you hear it. So always remember that there's this absolute magic to all the music that you know in the classical tradition at one point was the newest song in the world. So I encourage you to listen to contemporary music with a fresh set of ears and the spirit of newness.